Yesterday started like any other day, or so I thought. My husband asked me to use his phone to log into his banking app. This wasn't unusual. He often handed me his phone for things like this. But as I was scrolling to find the app, something caught my eye, a new icon on his screen. It was a calculator app. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then confusion set in. My husband has an iPhone, which already has a built-in calculator. Why would he download a second one? The thought nagged at me, but I played it cool, pretending I hadn't noticed. I made a mental note of the app's icon so I could investigate later. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about that app. Something about it felt off, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. That evening, once he went to bed, I decided to do some digging. When I had some privacy, I searched for the app on my own phone. My heart dropped. It wasn't just a calculator, it was a hidden photo and video vault. The app was designed to look innocent, but once you entered a passcode, it revealed its true purpose, a place to hide private files. My stomach churned. I didn't want to believe the worst, but a sinking feeling told me I had to check. I waited until I was absolutely sure my husband was asleep. My heart raced as I carefully took his phone and went to the bathroom. I started with his messages. Nothing. Then I checked his social media accounts. Still, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Maybe I was overthinking this. Maybe I had jumped to conclusions. But then I remembered the app. I hesitated, staring at the screen. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the icon. It asked for a passcode. My mind raced. What could it be? I tried a few guesses before it hit me. The year our son was born. It worked. What I found inside shattered me. The app was full of photos and videos of him with another woman. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. My brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. There were screenshots of text conversations, pictures of her selfies, posed photos, casual shots, and then the videos. Some showed them in intimate moments, their faces full of a closeness that should have been reserved for us. Others were even worse. As I scrolled through, piecing together the evidence, it became clear this wasn't a one-time mistake. Based on the timestamps and conversations, this affair had been going on for at least 7 months. 7 months of lies. 7 months of betrayal. Then I came across one video that made me physically ill. It was filmed in our car, the car we share, the car I drive our son around in every day. They were in the passenger seat, and she was on top of him. At one point, she mentioned being cold. What he did next made my blood run cold. He reached into the back seat and grabbed our toddler son's blanket. The same blanket our little boy takes everywhere. The one he cuddles with when he's scared or sick. He wrapped it around her. I couldn't believe it. Using something so innocent, so precious, in such a disgusting context, felt like a new level of betrayal. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was the violation of something that belonged to our son. I had to stop watching. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone. My stomach turned, and I felt like I might throw up. Somehow, I forced myself to remain calm. I put his phone back exactly where I found it and went to our son's room. I spent the rest of the night curled up on the floor, tears streaming down my face as I tried to process what I had seen. Morning came, but the anger inside me hadn't subsided. If anything, it had grown. But I knew I couldn't let it consume me, not yet. I had to think clearly. Blowing up on him right away would give him the chance to cover his tracks, to twist the narrative. No, I needed a plan. First, I called my mother. She's the only person I've confided in so far. Hearing her voice gave me some comfort, but the humiliation was still overwhelming. How had I not seen the signs? How had I been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? My mother was furious. She told me to pack my bags and come stay with her immediately. But I wasn't ready to leave just yet. I needed more than just evidence. I needed clarity. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine. My husband acted normal like nothing had happened. He even kissed me goodbye on his way to work. The audacity of it all made my skin crawl. I couldn't help but wonder if he'd seen her that day too. Once he was gone, I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of the photos, videos, and conversations. I emailed them to myself and backed them up on a secure cloud drive. I knew I might need them later, whether for legal reasons or simply to remind myself of the truth if he tried to deny it. That evening, when he came home, I couldn't even look at him. Every time he spoke to me, I felt like I might explode. But I held it together. I knew my moment would come, and when it did, I needed to be ready. The following day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Sitting in that office, explaining everything, felt surreal. The lawyer listened patiently and assured me that I had options. He explained the steps I could take to protect myself and our son, both financially and emotionally. It was comforting to know that I wasn't powerless, even if I felt like my world was falling apart. That night, I confronted him. I waited until our son was asleep. My heart pounded as I sat across from him, my hands clutching my phone. He must have sensed something was off because he looked at me with concern. "What's wrong?" he asked. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words caught in my throat. Then I opened the hidden app on my phone and placed it in front of him. His face went pale. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I asked, my voice shaking. He stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but the evidence was undeniable. I didn't need him to admit anything. I already knew the truth. What hurt the most was the lack of remorse. He apologized, yes, but it felt hollow, like he was more upset about being caught than about the pain he'd caused. He tried to downplay it, saying it was just a mistake and that it didn't mean anything. But I couldn't believe him. Not after everything I'd seen. I told him I needed space and that he should leave. He protested, saying we could work through it, but I was firm. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of strength. This wasn't something I could forgive, not now, and maybe not ever. The next few days were a blur. He moved out, and I've been staying at my mother's house with our son. It's been hard, but I've found solace in the small moments, playing with my son, talking to my mother, and even just sitting in silence, allowing myself to feel everything. I don't know what the future holds. Part of me wants to fight for our marriage, but another part of me knows that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on what matters most: my son and my own well-being. One thing is certain: I'll never ignore my instincts again. That tiny feeling that something was off led me to the truth, no matter how painful it was. And while I may be broken now, I know I'll heal, one piece at a time. My mother was supportive, but I could hear the hurt in her voice. She was angry, too angry on my behalf, angry for her grandson. She told me to come to her house as soon as possible, to bring my son and stay with her until I figured out my next steps. That's exactly what I planned to do. After hanging up the phone, I sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of her words sink in. My mother had always been my rock, and knowing she had my back gave me a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. But her voice had carried a pain that mirrored my own, and it broke my heart to know that my struggles were hurting her too. Still, I knew that moving forward was the only option. That evening, I contacted a divorce lawyer. I needed to make sure I handled everything the right way. The lawyer listened patiently as I laid out my story, and her calm, professional demeanor was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. She explained the importance of gathering evidence, especially if I wanted to secure custody of my son. Her advice was clear. The more proof I had, the stronger my case would be. Hearing this, I made a difficult but necessary decision. I would wait for the next opportunity to access my husband's phone. I needed to collect as much proof as possible before confronting him. The thought made my stomach churn, but I knew it was the only way to ensure a better future for my son and me. As I prepared for what lay ahead, my emotions swung wildly between anger, sadness, and determination. The betrayal felt like a gaping wound, and every memory of our happier times seemed like salt being rubbed into it. How could he do this to me? To our son? The image of him using our child's blanket to comfort another woman during their disgusting rendezvous was burned into my mind. It was a level of disrespect and deceit I couldn't fathom. That night, while he was at work, I began packing. I moved through the house quietly, methodically, making sure to take only what my son and I would need for the immediate future. As I folded tiny shirts and stuffed beloved toys into a suitcase, tears blurred my vision. My son, blissfully unaware, played with his blocks on the living room floor. He was too young to understand the storm brewing around him, but his innocence was a reminder of why I had to be strong. The next step was the hardest, going through his phone. I waited until he was asleep and carefully unlocked it, my hands trembling. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were messages, dozens of them, and photos that left no doubt about his infidelity. Each text was a dagger to the heart, but I took screenshots of everything, sending them to my own email for safekeeping. By the time I was done, I felt both vindicated and devastated. I placed the evidence and a stack of divorce papers on the kitchen counter, where he would see them when he got home from work the next day. By then, my son and I would be gone. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't trust myself to keep my composure, and I didn't want my son to witness any of it. Even as I write this, the humiliation and anger are fresh. I feel betrayed not just as a wife, but as a mother. How could he bring our child into this mess? How could he sully something as innocent as our son's blanket by using it in such a vile way? These questions haunt me, but I know there's no satisfying answer. He made his choices, and now I have to make mine. The thought of starting over terrifies me. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I deserve better. My son deserves better. We don't deserve to be part of this toxic, deceitful environment. For too long, I've put his needs and desires ahead of my own, but this betrayal was the final straw. Looking back, there were subtle signs I ignored, nights when he was overly protective of his phone, unexplained absences, small changes in his behavior that I brushed off as stress from work. I'd told myself that every marriage had its rough patches, that these things were normal. But nothing could have prepared me for the extent of his betrayal. I've replayed the events of the past day over and over in my mind. Part of me still can't believe this is my reality. I've loved this man for years. I've built a life with him. We share a child. And now, it's all falling apart. The life I'd envisioned for us, a happy home, a loving partnership, a strong foundation for our son, was nothing but a lie. But I won't let this destroy me. My priority now is my son. He's too young to understand what's happening, but I refuse to let him grow up in a household where lies and deceit are the norm. He deserves a stable, loving environment, and I'll do everything in my power to give that to him. Even if it means starting over from scratch, I'll do it. Because he's worth it. Because I'm worth it. The road ahead won't be easy. I'll have to face the pain, the embarrassment, the challenges of rebuilding my life as a single mother. There will be days when I'll want to give up, when the weight of it all feels too heavy to bear. But I'll remind myself of why I'm doing this: for my son, for me, for the chance to build a life filled with love, respect, and honesty. To anyone reading this who's been through something similar, I want you to know you're not alone. It's okay to feel broken. It's okay to grieve the life you thought you had. But don't let the actions of someone else define your worth. You deserve love, respect, and honesty, and it's never too late to demand those things for yourself. Tonight, I'll take the first step toward a new beginning. As I close the door on this chapter of my life, I'm filled with a mix of fear and hope. Fear of the unknown, but hope for a brighter future. It's hard to say goodbye to the life I once knew, but I know it's the right thing to do for me and for my son. The next morning, as I loaded our bags into the car, my son babbled happily in the back seat, completely unaware of the monumental change about to take place. My mother's house was only a short drive away, but it felt like I was crossing into a whole new world. As I turned the key in the ignition, a wave of emotion washed over me. This was it, the beginning of our new life. When we arrived, my mother met us at the door, pulling me into a tight hug. "You're strong," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You'll get through this, and we'll be here every step of the way." Her words were a balm to my wounded heart. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry, not out of despair, but out of gratitude. I wasn't alone. I had my son, my mother, and the strength within me to face whatever came next. That night, as I tucked my son into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that I could rebuild. Hopeful that I could create a better life for my son and me. And hopeful that, in time, I would heal. This is just the beginning of our story. And while it may have started with betrayal and heartbreak, I'm determined that it will end with love, resilience, and a future filled with possibilities.